I am your host, Nicole Will, and we're so happy you're here as we navigate the world with your aging loved one. We are here to come alongside older adults, family members, and the senior living community as we explore the world of aging and elder care with helpful resources, informative interviews, and approachable conversation. We get to do this together, so join us on our journey, and this is the willGather podcast. As we age, where we live matters. But more importantly, we need to ask ourselves the question, what can I put in place that gives me independence, quality of life, dignity, wellness, and doing what I love? As families and older adults, we face decisions and at times need to contemplate our next. The emotions, struggles, and stigmas around a potential move to a community or setting up more support at home weighs on our mind. My guest today is Catherine Owens, author of Be Your Own Hero, Senior Living Decisions Simplified, and founder of CLO Consulting as a senior living consultant. In her book and in our conversation today, we look at making proactive and educated decisions rather than making decisions in crisis and understanding the difference between aging in place and putting in place what you need to age well. Catherine urges us as families and older adults to have difficult but necessary conversations so we can understand the decision process and how it can benefit families and the senior living communities that they're considering. We look at how we define independence and quality of life, changing the idea and redefining what successful aging looks like, putting in place what we need to continue aging well. There are many components of this, and it's important that we ask those important questions. What environments best support the quality of life that I want to have? I loved this conversation with Catherine as she's bringing together those two worlds of senior living and aging in place. This is an important conversation as she calls us to be our own hero, be proactive, and educate us on all that's available so we can have a life full of purpose, joy, and meaning. Here is my interview with Catherine Owens. Hi, Catherine. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, Nicole. How are you?
I'm good. We both were talking about the weather where we are. And you've got cold, I've got snow. We're going to make it through.
Yes. I'm really ready for spring, but
Me
we'll take what we
too.
get.
Yes, I know. In Minnesota, we have where it's like they joke and say it's like first spring. Oh, just kidding.
hmm
Second spring. Oh, major snow. And then maybe we get maybe we get to spring. So we've got a little bit of a
Yes.
ways to go, but we're hopeful, right? I am so glad we get to have this conversation. It's important. We get to talk about all the things today. And I've read your book. My listeners can't see, I'm holding it up. I enjoyed it. I thought it was so good. It's Be Your Own Hero, Senior Living Decisions Simplified. And you also offer and share about so much more, which your voice in this space is so needed, and I'm so grateful for it. I want
Thank
you
you.
to let us know more about you. How did you come into this space? What prompted your desire to write the book and share with us kind of where you're at?
Well, lots of good questions, Nicole.
Yeah.
um, I've been in this space for going on 20 years, and clearly by I don't even want to say accident, but really it was just by luck. I had moved to Idaho from Seattle and was looking for a job in the healthcare industry and realized I did not know anybody professionally. And I saw a position open at a senior living community. And at the time, I'll be honest, I had that same idea that we all have of what a senior living community is. And it was just that vision of the nursing home that I went to as a youth, to sing Christmas carols and to visit grandma. And my first thought was, I don't want to work in a place like that. But I needed a job and accepted the position and soon fell in love with it. And honestly, I always think it's kind of cliche to say, I knew what I wanted to be when I grew up, but I did. And
Mm-hmm.
I love to watch human interaction and just the dynamics of people. And it was fascinating to me because I was in this space with older adults, I'd say probably between 80 and 100 years old. And I felt like I was in high school, but with older adults.
Right.
And I mean, there was still a guy that was trying to connect with all the women and the women that were gossiping. And I just realized that even though our bodies are aging, our spirits are still growing. And it's funny that you both said this is an exciting topic and we're excited to talk about it. But what I really noticed early on was it was a topic nobody wanted to talk about until they absolutely had to talk about it. And as I started working with families that were going through the decision process, I realized a few things that were consistent. And number one, it was typically a crisis situation. People waited till they absolutely had to. There wasn't really any positive thoughts about it. It was something that people swore they'd never do. And I just watched the people living in the community and saw how they were thriving and saw how their lives were benefiting. And I always call it a bounce up in health. And I realize it's when you put in place what you need or what you need to support those needs that you currently have, that's when you thrive, regardless of what environment it is. It's important to put in place the things that are going to support your current needs. So that started me down really my path of wanting to educate people. Well, one, get them to have conversations before the crisis, but just educate them on really the power of putting in place an environment that supports their needs, and realizing there were so many social stigmas and misconceptions and ideas that we have just adopted as a society about aging and senior living communities and what defines dignity and independence. And I just thought, I've got to put something out there. Number one, because people are going to wait to the last minute and they don't know where to start. They don't know what questions to ask. They don't know what they don't know. They don't know what they should be looking for. And so I thought, my hope is to get them to be proactive, but the reality is a lot of people are still going to wait. So how do I provide a resource that's quick, easy, but helps people navigate what they say is one of the hardest decisions a person will have to make?
It is. And it's such an important conversation. And I know, as families, we are faced with so many decisions, and older adults as we get a little bit older, and we're contemplating what's our next. And sometimes it's not always clear what that is, and it helps us. I thought the book really helped us kind of distill down and ask those questions while taking us through this framework. One of the things I really appreciated was that you laid it out so clearly and had what's that accepted thought process that we've always just thought of or adopted, but then what is the reality? And then what are those questions we're going to ask ourselves to really be reflective and be able to get to the root of why we're wanting to do certain things and what those decisions are. So it's so important kind of getting over some of those stigmas around the potential move and what senior living looks like, or also identifying, do we set things up at home and what that looks like. What are some of those, when you were doing your research or interacting with your residents and families, what were some of those overwhelming misconceptions or thoughts that people had that buy into the narrative, I guess, so to speak?
Great question. So I'll go back. You had mentioned in the book there's these social stigmas, and so there's a lot of questions that are designed to be reflective. And because when you look for a list of questions online that you should be asking, it's all transactional or about a community. None of it really is about you as an individual and what's important to you. And I love how you said, as you're thinking about the next, sometimes we don't know what the next is. And what I was seeing is that people were recognizing their current situation wasn't working and they knew they needed something, but they weren't quite sure if it was providing support at home, moving to a community, modifications for the home. And part of that is because they just never really had a conversation or educated themselves. And so as I started talking with people, I realized, number one, the biggest misconception is independence, dignity, quality of life as we get older are defined by staying in our home. That is how we define independence. So one of the very first questions I put is, what does independence look like for you? Set aside where you live. What does it look like? Does it look like being able to go interact with friends anytime I want? Being able to go see my family, I'm a a grandparent. And for me, I want to have the energy to play with a 4-year-old. I want to be able to get up and down off that floor 20 times a day. And so it's really stop and define these things. And people didn't, as I was talking with people, they didn't realize that they had these stigmas or fears associated with it until they started asking themselves these questions and really being honest. But when you speak of the narrative, what I also recognize is, and you and I talked about this on our previous call, we as an industry have created the narrative about this. And there isn't a one size fits all, but as an industry, I often see where we divide it black and white. You're either in your home with services or you're in a community. And there's so many different options. But when we brand our businesses to say, I allow someone to maintain dignity by staying in their home, we've just written the narrative that what dignity is staying in your home. And so there's lots of questions in the book that are really designed to just say, what's important to me in this next phase of my life? What if I could have the perfect picture of aging well, what would that look like? Plan B, something happens and we need to make other what's next ideas. What does that look like? So it's too important of a conversation. There's too many variables. And another reason for the book is it's a very emotionally driven decision. And oftentimes people don't recognize how the emotions are driving their decision or keeping them from making decisions.
Mm-hmm. That sentence you said really hit home for me when you said we define dignity as staying in home, which does not necessarily, it's not accurate. We know that, but we've defined it as that. So we just accept that rather than challenge it. And we had such a great conversation. We should have hit record on that.
That really was.
It really was good.
I was thinking before we got on this call just about that, where people, that misconception of as long as I'm in my home, I'm independent. And it's interesting because I see this even once someone has moved into independent living. They don't want to move to the next level of care when their needs change. And so they go through this emotional process all over again as I have to stay in place and bring additional help. And I've seen so many people that think that's what I have to do instead of challenging it. And I was thinking about, if I'm in my home and I have someone come in there and just sit there and watch me and wait for something to happen, I'm not going to feel like I have my dignity or independence, because I know when all of us, we have guests, we love having guests in our home, but I relax once the guests leave and I don't feel like I have to take care of them. I have to entertain them. And so you look at a community that has that same support. You have your own home. They're just there when you need. And so you don't have someone in your home with you. You get to be independent in your home and you have someone available as you need. And so it's just kind of looking at things differently and looking at things for what they are, not what we've been told they are.
Yeah. And when we had visited before, what stood out to me is we were both so passionate about bringing that conversation together, that it wasn't us versus them, senior living, being at home, that as families and older adults, our caregiving lives in all of those environments, even more so at times in senior living. And so how do we bring that together, bring the industry together, forge the conversation, ask the tough questions, challenge the narrative a little bit. And so having you here and we are able to dialogue through that was important to me. So yeah, it's
I
important
appreciate
to do that.
I really did enjoy. It's always fun. And I think we both said this, when you get to meet someone professionally that has that same mindset of really truly advocating for quality of care, whatever that answer is, because it's going to look different. And the way that I've changed the narrative is to stop using the term aging in place, because I don't want to age in place. I don't want to be stuck in a place. I approach things as putting in place what we need to continue aging well. And that's not once you hit 75, that's at every stage in our life. What do we need to age well, or to just have the overall quality of life that we want? And up until we have to make that decision, we're always looking at different things that we need to take away to eliminate stress, or we need to put in our environment to add wellness. Why are we stopping that once we hit a certain age? You look at, there's this big focus, and it's so wonderful, this holistic focus and recognition of quality of life and overall wellness is defined by so many different components, whether it's social interaction, the environment that we live in, physical wellness, our diet, spiritual wellness. So again, when we get to where we have those needs, all of that should not take a back seat because now quality of life is living in our home.
It is. Yeah. You talk about like at some point we trade that for the idea that wellness and quality of life happen when we age in place. And all that we need to adopt and look at as what is successful aging and what contributes to our wellness at every age. And you even answered some of my questions, which is, what do we need to think about or what do we need to put in place as we age well? Can you kind of define that for us? So as we're thinking about some of those things, we know what we can implement.
Great question. And when I advocate for people to be proactive, it's not just proactive in this decision. It's not just proactive in this conversation. But when I say, what do you want that phase of your life to look like? A lot of that is based on the decisions that we're making now. Our physical wellness, our diet and exercise, all of those things we're finding contribute to physical wellness, cognitive decline, all of those things can play a role, positive or negative, however we incorporate those into our life or don't incorporate those. And you've probably seen this, but I'll say pre-COVID, a lot of people had the idea the only time I need to make a move or put things in place is when I can no longer take care of myself. And I've always been a huge advocate of social interaction and isolation, the impacts that isolation can have on cognitive, on physical, on mental wellness. And it was interesting because for years I've educated on this and I've advocated for it. And when COVID hit, and all of a sudden I was grounded, I was not leaving my home, I was doing everything virtually, I started feeling that kind of just depression and not wanting to be involved and engaged. And all of us, when we had that social taken away and we had that human interaction and we had the touch, all of those things taken away, it was a wake-up call of how critical and vital it is. And unfortunately, being in the senior living industry, I saw a lot of decline in health, rapid decline in health once that was removed. And so having networks in place, having social interaction, I always tell people, put those things in place before you need it. Start establishing a network, start establishing a community. And in my communities, even though we had social distancing and we had to stay 6 feet apart and activities were at a minimal and we were taking food to the apartments, all of those things that changed their day-to-day life, there was still a sense of community. There was still a sense of people are here watching out for me. I have friends that I can call. I have people that are going to go out and take care of my needs. So it's those little things that putting in place, recognizing the importance, maintaining physical health, emotional health, mental health are critical to aging well.
I love the title of your book, Be Your Own Hero, because it takes being empowered and education and being proactive to whatever decision we're making, we're doing that with full agency and full, being our own hero and stepping into those decisions.
It's interesting because another, I would say, accepted thought process I started seeing was people thinking that if I make this type of a move, I'm going to lose control in my decision making. And that was a huge defining of independence for them. And the reality is, what I was seeing is people waiting until there was a crisis and having other people have to make those decisions. They lost all control in their decision process.
So true.
Their families did not know what was important to them. Their families didn't know. I'll share a quick story. A friend of mine, a golf buddy of mine, his mom she didn't need independent living. She was managing. People say, well, mom's managing just fine, but life isn't just meant to be managed. It's meant to be enjoyed.
Yes.
And he kept trying to talk with her about moving to a community where she could have friends. She would be able to just go out and do things because she didn't drive, and she would have all these things open up to her and she would not even talk about it. Well, he had lunch with her every week, and one week he went to pick her up and she didn't come out. So he went inside and she was having a stroke. Took her to the hospital. She was admitted. 3 days later, he was told, your mom can't live alone. You need to find a place for her. She's being discharged in 48 hours. So he had 2 days to just have no idea what his mom wanted, no idea where to even begin looking. He just had to go pick a place and hope that it was okay. And to me, that is total loss of control and empowerment, where, as you said, be your own hero is whether you need it or not, start having a conversation and start saying, this is what's important to me. This is what I would like to have happen. This is what I feel gives me quality of life. And do that check-in with yourself. I have to do that check-in with myself all the time. Am I being socially engaged? No, I'm watching Netflix. I mean, it's, we have to do that check-in all the time, but we have to be our own advocate.
What do you think limits people from wanting to think about some of those decisions ahead of time?
Really, really great question. And I think a huge part of it is how we've defined quality of life. And when we start planning retirement and we start planning, it's golfing, it's traveling, it's grandkids, and also our homes, there's memories made in our homes. There's traditions in our homes. There's community built around our homes. There's all these things that it's change. It requires change, and change is scary. Change is hard.
Change is hard.
I mean, traditionally, people tend to stick with what they know, whether it's comfortable or not, because they know that versus the unknown. And my whole approach is whether or not you need any kind of services, at least understand what the different services are, what home care can provide, what home health can provide. A lot of people don't even know the difference. Home care is with your activities of daily living. Home health is nursing. So it's just educate yourself so that when things happen, you've had the conversation, you can sit down, you can come up with a plan based on your knowledge and understanding and your wishes.
I have 2 questions related to that, which is you do a great job of explaining all of the senior living options so families and older adults can look and see, okay, what is that? And what are some of the intangibles that we gain? I think we think of senior living and we say, I have a place to live. They help with housekeeping, potentially meals. What else comes along with that we don't necessarily think of right away?
Thank you for bringing up the intangibles. That is something I speak to quite a bit, and that is the quality of life aspect. So I do talk about the different levels of care, and a lot of people assume they're apples to apples. And so I get people come in and they're looking for the least expensive. We all have a budget, understandable, but the food we buy, the cars we buy, the houses we buy, where we buy our houses, it's all based on different aspects and different levels of quality. And that's the same in senior living. That's your home, and you do get what you pay for. So understanding what each can provide, but then take the time to go see what differentiates each, and that's the intangibles.
Yeah.
And so the intangibles
how
are
you feel when you're there is probably
yes.
one.
Yeah. When you go to a friend's house and it's so perfect and so immaculate and so nice that you don't feel like you can relax. Or you go to another friend's house and it's just very comfortable and inviting and warm, and you love the way that you feel when you're there. It's the same with any community. That would be your home. And so I teach people how to tour a community, things to look at, and not just aesthetically, but how do you feel when you walk in? Does it feel happy? Are people engaging? But the intangibles really are the things that you can't put a cost on. So I do a cost calculator in my book, because with senior living, it's typically one number. Everything's in that one cost per month. And that can be really shocking for people, especially if they have their houses paid off.
Oh, right.
And they think, why would I, my house is paid off. Why would I go pay $4,000 a month?
Mm-hmm.
And again, when you start listing it out, your property taxes, your homeowner's insurance, groceries, utilities, probably by then you're paying housekeeping or you're having someone support with transportation, whatever it is, listing out all those costs and then what's included in a community. It may be a little bit more in a community, but the intangibles are where the value is. That's that peace of mind. For an adult child, the peace of mind that if anything happens to mom or dad, someone's right there Before I can get to them, someone's right there. It's the, like during COVID, knowing that people are there watching out for your best interests and your needs. It's being able to, for someone that lives alone, that doesn't drive, that's isolated, they walk out their door and they have friends right there. They have people to engage with, things to do. They're not dependent on someone when someone's available. They now have the independence to just walk out their door and do what they want to do when they want to do it. So it's all of those things that you can't put a value on. And I always say, typically when someone does look, there's something going on in their current situation that's not working.
Yeah.
And you've seen that. And I call that the motivating factor or the motivating reason. But the intangible is what addresses that. If someone's lonely, they're isolated, they're depressed, so they're not eating well, all of a sudden they're in a community where they feel valued. People are asking about them. People are watching out for them. They get to have meals with someone. All those things that we can't put a cost on, but give us quality of life.
That was one of my questions is, what do you love about senior living? And I feel like you definitely answered some of those. Is there anything else you can think of that would be what really stands out or overcomes some of those fears or questions that families might have?
I would just start with going and looking. And I'm going to use my in-laws for an example. Forgive me. But they have been actively being proactive for 4 years. And in their mind, being proactive was, we've been looking. Well, when we really started talking about it, they've been driving through the parking lot for 4 years. They have not gone into a community. They had not called a community. And so go visit a community. Just start getting an idea, because just like I had that idea that it was depressing and there's no way I could even work here, 9 times out of 10, it's the adult kids that say, I could live here.
Oh,
because
for sure.
It's so different. It's, it's like having a beautiful apartment or home with a great clubhouse. Like every other apartment complex, you just have added benefits and added services. And I have raised my daughter in senior living. My grandson now goes. For a long time when I was single, it was my social. I'd go to the baseball games. I'd stay and have a glass of wine after work. And, people say, I don't want to live by old people. I want to live by people with life experiences, with stories, with things that I can gain knowledge from. And, you get to go to work every day and see people's lives change. And the reality is it changes your life. I mean, it's just such a powerful and wonderful experience. And it's hard. It is emotionally difficult because oftentimes when people move in, there is loss. They've lost a spouse. They've lost, the ability to take care of themselves in some ways. They're losing, their driver's license, their home, all of these things that define who we are. So families need to acknowledge that and, acknowledge that this is hard. I mean, I've had families say, buck up, Dad, it's what we got to do.
Right.
And he's telling me I'm going to come kicking and screaming. And I'm like, heck yeah, you better come kicking and screaming. I mean, we're all entitled to our feelings, and we're all entitled to not be happy at times, that we have to make necessary changes. And so for all the positives, there's still the fear of change, and there's still a level of loss that people are experiencing, that we all do anytime we need to make that significant of a change. And so what kind of a simple exercise, and I put these questions in the book, is list out, what are you hoping to gain by making a change? And usually that addresses that motivating factor. All the things that you're hoping to gain, and list all the things that you would gain if you stay in this environment that no longer works for you. So you're going to gain more stress, you're going to gain more frustration, more isolation, whatever it is that's not working. And it becomes very clear that, yes, it's going to be really hard to leave this home that I love, and all of these traditions that we have every year in this home, whatever it is. And yes, I'm excited that I'm not going to have to worry about this anymore, or that I'm going to be able to make friends, or that my daughter is going to go back to being my daughter and not the handyman and transportation. And so sometimes just simple things like that. Those are questions I put in the book. Again, reflective questions that only you can answer, and just be honest. You don't have to share it with anyone. The book is set up like a workbook. There's questions at the end of each chapter after I talk about, the accepted thought process and the reality. there's questions that go with that only you can answer, or that maybe you want to have that conversation with a spouse, an adult child, someone, so that you can talk through it. Because I know for me, sometimes I just have to talk through to figure out what it
Oh,
is that I'm
completely. Yeah.
to
Hmm.
do. You know?
Yes. It's like that personal journal almost, where you can have a place to put down everything you're thinking, look back, see if those thoughts change in a day or two or a
Mhm.
week or whatnot. But how helpful that is. And I acknowledging those emotions are so real because they are. I also raised my children in senior living. When I was working, I would bring my kids to all of the things and they would interact and visit, and it just became such a normal part of our life.
Mhm.
And I loved seeing them interact with the older adults, and the my residents loved seeing the kids. It was
Yes,
like
yes.
highlight. They saw me pregnant, they saw them as newborns, they saw them grow. I learned all about how to make different recipes and just, oh my gosh, so many life lessons. It was the most treasured time for me. And it's such a rich gift to have that interaction for sure.
Yes, absolutely is. And you probably experience this as well. I always feel like I'm working with living history. It's
Mm,
just people that have
yes.
paved the way, they've done it. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes their stories are about things that you've only read in history books. And sometimes they're just, I had a lady that was so upstanding in her community. And so just, that's the only way I could describe it. But she was also secretly, she was the seamstress for the brothel in town.
Ah,
And
so good.
I thought, I love those kinds of stories because, she did what she had to do to help
Mm-hmm.
provide for the family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and also, just how forward thinking she was without, every generation has its own stigmas or its own
Right.
definitions of what's right or wrong. And you're right, there's so much that we can learn. And for that generation, from the younger kids, because, I mean, heck, they need the remote or anything
Mm-hmm.
technical, but they're learning from the kids as well, and just that interaction. And it's a very treasured gift. And
Mm-hmm.
if you've never experienced it, it's hard to explain, but
Mm-hmm.
you've experienced it, so
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
understand it.
Yes. You referenced how hard it is, how hard that transition can be. We're generalizing it. It's maybe not for everybody. There were residents that would come in and would be really not happy that they were there at times, and some that were just excited, life of the party, ready to go. But some families, I think, were surprised that that transition could take a little bit of time.
Mhm.
How do you explain that to families? Like, how long can that transition take and give them hope that it's still okay?
Oh gosh, that's a really great question, Nicole. One of the things I think people are afraid when they say I'm afraid of losing independence, it's losing their identity. And senior living communities are designed to add value, but they're not designed to change who you are or what you enjoy. And so sometimes I'll give an example. I have had a gentleman that moved into a community, and all he cared about was sitting in his recliner, watching Fox News, and he would go to the veterans coffee every morning. For the first 3 weeks that he lived in the community, each week he had a different family member that tried to get him to go to all the social events.
Yeah.
Well, what happened was he still sat in his recliner and watched TV, and they went to all the social events every week. But it's important to acknowledge that if people are shy or they're not really into big social gatherings, things like that, that's probably not going to change. It may. For some people, social is just having a meal with someone. Their purpose and reason to get dressed is to go down and have a meal with people. And so it's really acknowledging, this is who mom is, but also being open to that might change. And I'll go back to my in-laws. When we started touring communities, I sat down with them the night before and went through these questions, the reflective questions. And my father-in-law, who is 91, runs the town coffee every week. He runs the city, basically. I'll just put it that way. He is involved with everything. Everybody in that city knows him. He probably has 5 or 6 visitors a day that stop in their house. And my mother-in-law loves to just sit and watch the birds and just kind of smile and say hello to everybody. But she really doesn't like to get out like he does. And so he's explaining this to me, that she's not going to want any of that social. And we went and toured, and he got really quiet, but she was the one that was going through the calendar going, oh my gosh, they do this and they do that. And that night at dinner when we were home, just out of the blue, she said, you know what I love is that I can go out of my apartment, and if I walk by and I see Susie doing a puzzle, I can stop and do a puzzle with Susie. And all of us were going, who is this woman?
She's like blossomed.
Yeah. And so sometimes it's, people aren't going to change who they are. And sometimes, given the opportunity, they are going to say, hey, I want to try that. And so you never know. But also, when I talk about touring a community and what differentiates, those are questions to ask when you tour as well. Say, hey, mom's really nervous. She has a hard time coming out of her shell. She has a hard time really reaching out to people if she needs help. How do you guys support that? And I always kind of equate it. It's like going to that new school. I'm starting a job for the first day. You don't know what you're supposed to do, where you're supposed to go. Are people going to like me? It's no different. And so ask the people there. A lot of communities, they may have programs where they have residents that want to be ambassadors and help people. Everybody needs sense of purpose. That might be theirs. They have programs where they come get you for every meal, and they figure out, people that have common interests and who you can sit with. So those are the types of questions as you're sitting and having a conversation, saying, what concerns do you have? What fears do you have? What are things that make you nervous about the move? What are things you're excited about? So that when you go in and tour a community, you can say, mom is a little bit nervous about this, or this is something that's really important to mom that she just enjoys doing. How can we make that happen? And so again, you got to have the conversation. You got to ask yourself some questions so that you know what to be asking to really differentiate.
And when we ask the questions, it goes back to we're our own hero and advocate, and feel that sense of empowerment with that. Those are questions about kind of the emotional state or that engagement. What are some other really good questions when we go to communities that are important to ask? Like any not miss questions that are really, really good?
When I differentiate the communities, I talk about the different services. And what I do is I break down the questions to where it's not just a yes or no question, to really use open-ended questions. So for an example, if you get a list from, let's say, AARP, this is what to ask. Do you provide nursing? Do you provide 3 meals a day? Do you provide transportation? Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, but we don't know anything beyond that. Yeah.
So if one of your concerns is mom is not managing her medications, how do you guys manage medications? So it's not saying yes or no, we manage it. Share with me how you manage it. What does your nursing consist of? And with regulations with levels of care community, they're pretty spelled out, but there's also a lot of room for interpretation. So again, I'll just use nursing because it's an easy example. Someone can say, yes, we have nurse oversight. And they do. They hire a contracted nurse, and she's there every couple of weeks checking on things, making sure that things are in compliance. And maybe the community down the street hires their own full-time nurse. So they know your mom, they know the baseline, they know maybe they catch something quicker because they say, hey, your mom's not acting the way she normally acts, or I've noticed she's not coming down to meals. So sometimes just asking the questions to understand how they provide the service and the extent that they provide the service. Meals is another one. No one wants to eat at the same restaurant every night. And again, we want independence of choice with what are we in the mood for? So instead of asking, do you have 3 meals a day? How are your meals? What is your meal plan like? Can I eat anytime I want? Is it made to order? Is it batch cooking? Do you support preferences, dietary needs? So really based on what's important to you, again, stopping to define that, what's important to you, what's motivating me to even look, design your questions around that and ask the how and the why, not do you. So they have to explain, and then you're really going to start getting the differences on how people do things.
I can't remember if it was in the book or in conversation, but you talk about how, it's not selling a service, but what do you need to do that you love? And that really defines, just like you were saying, even the questions that we're asking, getting really clear on what do I love? How do I want to be independent? And where is that available to be able to do that? And so those open-ended questions, I think, really get down to what that is.
Absolutely. And it is hard. You had mentioned this at the beginning that sometimes we know we need to look at that next step and we don't quite know what that is. And that's where it's critical that you just take the time to have the conversation of what is important to me, and it's kind of like buying a house. My baby sister just bought her first house. And of course, she wants everything.
Right.
She wants everything, no
Every
compromise.
amenity. Yeah.
Yes. Trying to, explain to her, you might need to compromise or, list out what's most important. It's no different with a community. Hopefully there's a community that checks all the boxes, but most likely you might have to compromise. I've seen people that refuse to move to a community because they don't have the best view. How often are they sitting in their apartment staring out the window looking at the view? I mean, it's all of the other stuff that gives the quality of life, the quality of meals, the quality of activities. Are the activities geared around what residents want, not this is what you're doing? So it's those types of things that when you sit down and say, my mother-in-law, for instance, she said, the number one thing for me is that we can eat anytime we want and that we have choice. So she knew going in, that was her very first question she asked.
Yeah. Like almost like a non-negotiable, right? Like we've got that in when we're dating, or I'm trying to think of what else. Houses. Buying a house.
Everything.
Everything.
And I put this in the book, but we do research when we buy cars. We do research when we're looking for new doctors. We do research when we're buying a new vacuum on ratings and quality, and we look at reviews. Why are we not doing this with this big of a life decision?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big
Instead
one.
of just saying, this one's $200 cheaper a month. Why is that? Or what's the value that you get or the intangibles that you get for that $200 a month?
Yeah. When you were talking about dining, the community where I was, it wasn't official, but what happened was everyone wanted to sit in the same seat for meals every time. And, God forbid someone disrupted that.
Like going to church.
And that is a question for me that I would want to know. Like, meals are such a big thing and you're connecting. Am I going to be able to visit with different people every meal? Am I going to be assigned a spot and I don't have control over who I'm visiting? All these things you don't really think about unless you're kind of in it. But just how important those questions are too, thinking about each of those components, whether it's nursing, engagement, mealtime, some of those bigger questions that we have. Yeah, it's just all comes together and we think of things as we go too.
And you bring up a really good point. And I think that's why it's important to ask or just say, tell me about mealtime. What is that like? So that you're not giving the answers. But mealtime's important to me. Tell me about how you guys do it. And it's interesting because on the other end, as a professional, I always ask, why is that important to you? Because someone can say, well, do you allow pets? Oh yeah, we allow pets. And we have this great, philosophy, blah, blah, blah. I hate pets. I don't want to live where there's pets.
Right.
And so it's both ends. It's the, why is that important to you? But tell me about your nursing. Tell me about maintenance. Tell me about what that looks like when mom needs help or when I can't get a hold of mom or whatever that is. How your people will call and say, do you have activities? Well, yeah, everybody has activities, but they may not be the type of activities you want to do. And so I bring this up in the book is, what is your lifestyle philosophy? Are you asking residents what they want to do? Do you have a resident council for diet, for dietary, for all of it? And I always tell residents, this is your home. And a philosophy I have with employees is we're a guest in their home. It's a place of work, but it's their home. And so do you as a resident have a say in what goes on in your home?
Yeah. And I would extend that too. My goal is to encourage families to use their voice and that they are also agents of change, and to speak up to not only celebrate the wonderful things that are happening in the community that they witness, but also challenge, how it's always been done. In some ways, I feel like, we've worked in senior living many years, and there's been change and there's a lot of similarities throughout the years. So how do we start to bring families and residents really in that conversation so that they can make it the environments that really have them thrive and grow? As you were talking about before, it's not changing who we are, it's supporting who we are and what we love and what we do.
Yes. And the reality is communities are never going to get it perfect 100% of the time. And so for families, sometimes they don't want to say something because they say, well, mom's afraid that people aren't going to treat her nice. Or, again, what is your guys' philosophy or approach, or how do I contact you if I have a concern?
It's a great question.
Do you have a monthly resident council? Can I sit in on it? Anything in life, we only get better by talking about it. And so I'll tell people and families I work with, we can't fix things if we don't know. We can't do better if we don't know. And knowing we're not going to get the eggs perfect every single time, it's how a company addresses things when they don't go perfect. To me is more important than expecting. And again, when you go back to validating feelings, I've had sometimes just taking a step back as the staff who we're in the community because we care and we want to provide. But I always say, recognize that we're trying to run a business and we're the stewards over their quality of life. They're entrusting us with their quality of life. So there might be some things that we can't do because as a business, we just can't do it. And there might be some things that we can do to maybe meet that need in a certain way. But again, have the conversation. And if you can't have a conversation, that's a good indication that things aren't probably going to change.
Right.
So we're humans. Things aren't always going to be perfect. But if you feel like you can talk and that you're being heard, which we all need and we all want, and that people are trying to address it, they're following up, they're following through, that's a good environment.
It is. And to celebrate that.
One of the things I tell people when they're touring is to talk with residents and to talk with other family members. One, because there's always power and validation in talking with someone that has been through what you're going through. And it's a good gauge. They're living it. They're living that every day. And you probably have seen this. There's always some that are just never happy. There's people in my family that are just never happy. There's people in my community. It's not just in senior living, just in general. There's people that no matter what you do or no matter how hard you try, they're going to find fault. But in general, if you talk to a few different people, you're going to get a good gauge. And again, go prepared with some questions to ask those family members or residents if you see them. All communities will offer, come and have lunch with us, have lunch with a resident, have lunch with a family member. Say, can I have lunch with someone and their adult child that has recently been through the decision or that has been here? Because they're going to give you, the honest truth. And again, take it with a grain of salt.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great idea. I love that idea of interacting with the residents and families.
It's interesting. I was just thinking about this resident that I had. I was with a community that we were just opening, and Bridge was her life. It was her life. It took me months to find one more person to fill what she needed for Bridge.
I've contemplated learning how to play before just so I could be like a fourth.
Yes, you're filling.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was just probably as important to me as filling that building was finding a bridge player for this lady. But every time I was on a tour, she would just stop and say, do you play bridge? Are you going to move in here? But then she would also complain about something. And I finally just had to say, you're never going to get someone to move in if you complain about where you live every single time. And she had told me she was happier than she had been in 30 years, but she just loved to point out whatever it was.
I know people like that. Yeah.
Yeah. We eventually got her a bridge player.
Oh, good, good. Oh, it's what when you get a win like that, there's nothing like it. It's like
Yes,
so,
yes.
so great. This has been wonderful. You're sharing your perspective. I hope people grab your book. They can really learn how education is so powerful when we know what questions to ask, not only ourselves, but communities, living at home, how it all comes together. I'm just so thankful for your voice. And where can we learn more? Also, share with us how you are supporting families and older adults now. I know that's a big part of what you're doing in senior living and all of it. Yeah.
So my book is available on Amazon. It's also available on my website, catherinelowens.com. And I offer it at a discount on my website, whether it's for a community, for families. I've had a lot of families say, oh my gosh, I have to buy this for every sibling I have. And so there's bundle packages as you buy more. There's a significant cost savings. And also just on my website, there's a lot of additional information that might be helpful for someone, things to think about. I do consulting with companies, I do consulting with families, just where do I start? So families will reach out to me for that. Presentations on just this book and what people should be thinking about, not just the questions, but just things like, how have decisions been made in the past? We get in this idea that mom has to make the decision and maybe mom is not comfortable. So just a lot of presentations and education opportunities for families to start thinking about things, and do a lot of trainings with senior living companies. A lot of the staff that we have were like I was 20 years ago. They have no experience. They don't understand who their customer is. They don't understand the emotions, the loss, the struggle of that decision. So I do a lot of trainings with companies on just how to support people through the decision process.
That would be so helpful. I know as a family, we've gone through that and you feel a little bit lost, but you want to feel supported by the professionals you're working with. So that's huge.
And thank you for saying that, because you probably got this a lot too when you're in a community, but families want to be as protective of their parents as we want to be protective of our parents. And so they'll call and say, I just want the price of a 1-bedroom apartment. And professionals can't help if you don't say, this is what's going on. This is what's happening. This is mom's concern. And, families don't want to be sold. You can say, hey, I don't want phone calls back. This is my concern. Do you guys address this? But for family members, when you guys are shopping and looking, be open and honest, because that's how you're really going to get the best information.
And to your point, we as professionals want that process to be as kind and understanding as possible. And we do that when we have all the tools and all the information. So we're all coming from a good place and we want that move to be as smooth and as joyful as possible. So definitely have that mindset.
Yes. And understand that even though you have the prettiest community in town, nothing competes with someone's home. And so that's going to be hard regardless of how wonderful and excited they are.
Yeah. And we can feel two things at once. We can feel super scared and not wanting to do this and excited about the new opportunity. It's like, I think it doesn't have to be, and it can be, they can live together.
Yes. And I talk about that quite a bit whenever I do presentations and in the book, is that there is a normal level of ambivalence, and that's the push and pull. And so that's a question that I ask a couple times throughout the book, is what is pushing you and what is keeping you from making the decision? Because that is where you're going to really begin to see, this is what I'm struggling with, and this is what is not working, that this is why I need to make the change. And again, sometimes just listing that out, you can acknowledge that I'm really struggling leaving this home. I built it myself, whatever it is. And I'm recognizing that this is something I need to do.
Yeah. So good. So good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Catherine.
You're welcome.
It's been a pleasure
talking with you.
Yeah, me too. I was so excited for our conversation today, and I'm sure we'll have many more.
Yes. Well, thank you for all that you do. I just really appreciate it. I was looking through some of your episodes, and just, you really do hit on a lot of topics people need to just be mindful of. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.